I know I've got two of my hands on the fire, on the halo. I can see my gloves. They're red normally. They start going full black and I can feel the pain.
In a world full of uncertainty and danger, some stories defy all odds, leaving us speechless and inspired. These are stories of ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, facing challenges that would seem impossible to overcome. From a man that was struck by lightning 7 times to the sole survivor of a volcanic eruption, here are 20 incredible stories of people who survived the impossible. Number 20, Aron Ralston. In April 2003, Aron Ralston set out on what seemed like a routine solo hike in Utah's Blue John Canyon, but his adventure quickly turned into a harrowing battle for survival. As he navigated the narrow canyon, a dislodged boulder trapped his right arm against the canyon wall, pinning him in place. Alone, without any way to call for help, and with limited supplies, Ralston faced an unimaginable predicament. He was stuck, deep in the canyon, with no one knowing his location. For 5 excruciating days, Ralston tried every conceivable method to free himself. He chipped away at the boulder with a pocket knife, rigged a makeshift pulley system, and even attempted to lift the massive rock, but nothing worked. As his water and food supply dwindled, Ralston recorded farewell messages for his family, resigned to the likelihood that he might not survive. But as his situation grew increasingly desperate, so did his resolve to live. On the 5th day, dehydrated and on the brink of death, Ralston made the unthinkable decision. Using a dull multi-tool, he amputated his trapped arm in a grueling process that took over an hour. Once freed, Ralston still had to rappel down a 65-foot wall and hike several miles before he was discovered by a family on a day hike and rescued. Ralston's ordeal became widely known after he recounted his experience in his book, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, and it was later dramatized in the film 127 Hours. Number 19, Yahya Abdi. On April 20th, 2014, Yahya Abdi, a 15-year-old boy from California, made headlines around the world when he defied death by stowing away in the wheel well of a Hawaiian Airlines flight from San Jose to Maui. Yahya was trying to escape a difficult life situation, hoping to reunite with his mother in Africa. In a desperate bid for freedom, he scaled the airport fence and climbed into the plane's wheel well just before takeoff. What followed was a death-defying journey that defied all logic. During the 5.5-hour flight, Yahya was exposed to life-threatening conditions. At cruising altitude, temperatures in the wheel well plummeted to -80 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air became dangerously thin due to the low oxygen levels at 38,000 feet. Miraculously, Yahya survived by slipping into a state of hypothermic coma, which slowed his bodily functions and allowed him to endure the extreme conditions. When the plane landed in Maui, airport workers were stunned to find him alive, albeit unconscious and severely hypothermic. Yahya's survival was nothing short of miraculous, with experts estimating that his chances of surviving such an ordeal were less than 1 in 4. Number 18, Ludger Silberis. On May 8, 1902, the Caribbean island of Martinique was engulfed in one of the deadliest volcanic eruptions in history. The Mount Pelée volcano erupted with catastrophic force, sending a fiery cloud of superheated gas, ash, and rock racing towards the nearby town of Saint-Pierre. The town, known as the Paris of the Caribbean, was home to nearly 30,000 people. In just minutes, the entire population was wiped out, except for one man, Ludger Silberis. Silberis, a convicted criminal, found himself in the safest place in Saint-Pierre purely by chance. The night before the eruption, he had been thrown into a small, stone-walled solitary confinement cell known as the cachot for brawling. The cell, with its thick walls and limited ventilation, was designed to be nearly airtight, an attribute that inadvertently saved his life. As the pyroclastic surge swept through the town, Silberis felt the heat and gas seeping into his cell, burning him severely, but the thick walls shielded him from the full force of the blast. For days, he endured agonizing pain in the darkness, with limited air and water. When rescue teams finally arrived, they discovered Silberis, badly burned, dehydrated, but miraculously alive. Ludger Silberis became the sole survivor of the Saint-Pierre disaster. Number 17, Vesna Vulovic. Vesna Vulovic, a Serbian flight attendant, holds an extraordinary record that defies all logic and odds. On January 26, 1972, Vesna was aboard JAT Flight 367, a routine commercial flight over what was then Czechoslovakia. The plane was cruising at 33,000 feet when it suddenly exploded in mid-air, likely due to a terrorist bomb, and disintegrated, sending debris and passengers hurtling toward the ground. Amazingly, Vesna survived the fall, becoming the only person in recorded history to have survived a fall from such an incredible height without a parachute. Her survival was nothing short of miraculous, with many factors contributing to her unbelievable escape from death. Vesna was pinned by a food cart in the fuselage, which remained attached to part of the aircraft's tail section. The pressure difference caused the wreckage to descend more like a falling leaf rather than plummeting straight down. Additionally, the thick snow on the ground provided a relatively soft landing, further cushioning her fall. Rescuers initially mistook her for a casualty, but to their astonishment, Vesna was still alive, though barely. She had suffered a fractured skull, 2 broken legs, and 3 broken vertebrae, which left her temporarily paralyzed from the waist down. Despite these severe injuries, Vesna eventually made a remarkable recovery, though she had no memory of the fall itself. Her survival was officially recognized by the Guinness World Records. Number 16. Julian Kopka. On Christmas Eve, 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Kupka boarded Lanza Flight 508 with her mother, heading from Lima, Peru, to their home in Pucallpa. The holiday trip quickly turned into a nightmare when their plane was struck by lightning over the Amazon rainforest, breaking apart at 10,000 feet. Julianne, still strapped into her seat, plummeted through the sky and miraculously survived the fall, landing in the dense jungle below. Julianne woke to a terrifying reality. She was the sole survivor of the crash. Despite suffering a broken collarbone, a deep gash on her leg, and a concussion, her survival instincts kicked in. With only a bag of candy as her food source, Julianne drew upon her knowledge of the rainforest, learned from her parents, who were biologists, to stay alive. She knew that following water would lead her to civilization, so she began a grueling 10-day trek through the unforgiving jungle. The rainforest presented constant challenges: swarms of insects, venomous snakes, and the relentless heat. At one point, maggots began infesting her wounds, adding to her misery. But Julianne pressed on, driven by sheer determination and survival instincts. On the 10th day, she stumbled upon a small boat moored by the river, leading her to a nearby hut. Exhausted and on the brink of collapse, Julianne was discovered by local fishermen who cared for her before taking her to safety. Her story of survival against impossible odds became legendary, and Julianne went on to study biology, dedicating her life to the rainforest that both nearly killed her and ultimately saved her. Number 15. Douglas Mawson. Douglas Mawson, an Australian explorer, embarked on one of the most harrowing survival journeys in the history of Antarctic exploration. In 1911, as part of the Australasian Antarctic Expedition, Mawson led a team to chart unknown territories of the icy continent. The expedition took a disastrous turn in 1912, when Mawson and 2 of his companions, Xavier Mertz and Belgrave Ninnis, set out on a long trek to explore further inland. Tragedy struck when Ninnis, along with their strongest sled and most of their supplies, plunged into a crevasse. Left with minimal food and resources, Mawson and Mertz were forced to turn back. The harsh Antarctic conditions, with temperatures plunging to -40°C, quickly took a toll on the men. They were left to survive on what little food they had, resorting to eating their remaining sled dogs, a diet that caused severe illness due to vitamin A poisoning from the dogs' livers. Mertz eventually succumbed to the harsh conditions, leaving Mawson alone over 100 miles from the base. Despite snowblindness, frostbite, and deteriorating health, Mawson pressed on. In a remarkable feat of endurance, he dragged himself across the treacherous ice, even falling into a crevasse but managing to crawl out. After a grueling 30-day journey, Mawson finally reached the safety of his base, only to find that the ship had left just hours before. He was forced to wait another year before being rescued. Number 14. Hugh Glass. Hugh Glass, a seasoned frontiersman and fur trapper, embarked on one of the most astonishing survival journeys in American history. In 1823, while part of a fur trading expedition in the uncharted wilderness of present-day South Dakota, Glass was viciously mauled by a grizzly bear. The attack left him with horrific injuries: a broken leg, a torn scalp, and deep lacerations across his back. His fellow trappers, believing he was on the brink of death, left him behind with 2 volunteers to provide a proper burial. However, fearing attacks from hostile Native American tribes, the volunteers abandoned Glass, taking his weapons and supplies with them. Alone and severely injured, Glass was determined not to die in the wilderness. With no means to defend himself and barely able to move, he began an agonizing crawl toward the nearest settlement, Fort Kiowa, more than 200 miles away. Glass relied on his extensive knowledge of the wilderness to survive. He ate wild berries, roots, and even scavenged a rotting bison carcass for sustenance. He set his own broken leg, used maggots to clean his wounds, and fought through relentless pain, hunger, and the threat of predators. His journey took 6 grueling weeks, during which he faced near impossible odds, but refused to give up. When Glass finally reached Fort Kiowa, his incredible story became the stuff of legend, inspiring books, movies, and countless retellings of his unbreakable spirit and will to survive. Number 13. Alexander Selkirk. Alexander Selkirk, a Scottish sailor, became the real-life inspiration for Daniel Defoe's famous novel, Robinson Crusoe. In 1704, Selkirk found himself marooned on the uninhabited island of Mas a Tierra, now Robinson Crusoe Island, in the South Pacific, after a dispute with the captain of the privateering ship Cinque Ports. Convinced the ship was unseaworthy, Selkirk demanded to be left ashore rather than continue the voyage, a decision that would lead to an extraordinary survival story. Alone on the island with only a few basic supplies, a musket, gunpowder, a knife, a Bible, and some clothing, Selkirk quickly had to adapt to his new reality. Initially stricken by loneliness and despair, he eventually learned to thrive in his isolated environment. Selkirk built 2 shelters out of pimento trees, domesticated wild goats for food and companionship, and even learned to make clothing from goatskins. He sustained himself on the island's abundant resources, which included wild fruits, fish, and the goats he hunted. Selkirk's most significant challenge was the mental toll of complete isolation. To maintain his sanity, he read the Bible regularly, sang psalms, and practiced his seamanship by crafting tools and maintaining his shelters. His survival skills grew sharper with time, and he became remarkably self-sufficient. After 4 years and 4 months of solitude, Selkirk was finally rescued by a passing British ship, the Duke. Number 12. Louis Zamperini and Russell Phillips. In 1943, during World War II, Olympic athlete Louis Zamperini and pilot Russell Phillips found themselves in a desperate fight for survival in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Their B-24 bomber, on a search and rescue mission, malfunctioned and crashed into the sea, leaving Zamperini, Phillips, and a third crew member, Francis McNamara, stranded on 2 tiny life rafts with no food, water, or hope of immediate rescue. For 47 harrowing days, Zamperini and Phillips battled the elements, hunger, and despair. They faced scorching sun by day and chilling cold by night, all while drifting over 2,000 miles across shark-infested waters. With no supplies, the men caught rainwater in makeshift containers to drink and survived on the occasional fish or bird they managed to catch with their bare hands. At one point, they even fought off a shark that lunged at their raft, highlighting the constant threat from predators lurking below. Their survival was not just a battle against the physical challenges, but also against the mental strain of isolation and uncertainty. Tragically, McNamara died after 33 days, succumbing to the harsh conditions. However, Zamperini and Phillips refused to give up. They kept each other's spirits alive with stories of home and plans for the future. On the 47th day, the 2 survivors were finally spotted by a Japanese patrol boat and taken as prisoners of war before being released. Number 11. Phineas Gage. In 1848, Phineas Gage, a 25-year-old railroad foreman in Vermont, became the subject of one of the most extraordinary survival stories in medical history. While working on a railroad construction site, Gage was using a tamping iron, a 3.5-foot-long, 13-pound metal rod, to pack explosive powder into a rock. In a freak accident, the powder ignited prematurely, sending the rod blasting through Gage's skull. The iron entered below his left cheekbone, passed behind his left eye, and exited through the top of his skull, landing several feet away. Amazingly, Gage not only survived, but remained conscious and able to walk within minutes of the incident. He was taken to a local doctor, who was astounded to find Gage alive and talking, despite severe damage to his brain, particularly in the frontal lobe. Gage recovered physically within a few months. However, the incident had profound effects on his personality. Before the accident, Gage was known as a responsible, hard-working, and amiable man. Afterward, he became impulsive, irritable, and prone to fits of anger, a complete reversal that puzzled the medical community. This dramatic personality change made Gage one of the first cases to suggest a link between brain function and personality, contributing significantly to the field of neuroscience. Phineas Gage lived for another 12 years after the accident. His skull and the infamous iron rod are now displayed at Harvard Medical School. Number 10. Beck Weathers. During the harrowing 1996 Mount Everest disaster, Beck Weathers, an experienced climber from Dallas, Texas, was part of a commercial expedition aiming to reach the summit of the world's highest peak. The climb quickly turned into a nightmare as a fierce blizzard descended, trapping climbers in treacherous conditions. As the storm intensified, Weathers and other climbers were forced to take refuge in the death zone, the area above 26,000 feet where the oxygen levels are critically low. Weathers, suffering from severe frostbite and exhaustion, was left behind by his team in a desperate bid to save others. His condition worsened, and he was presumed dead by the rescue teams. However, Beck's survival instincts kicked in. Miraculously, he regained consciousness in the blizzard, despite being badly frostbitten and partially blind from the severe cold. Driven by sheer determination and willpower, he crawled and staggered through the blizzard, battling extreme temperatures and fatigue. After a grueling struggle, Weathers stumbled into the camp, where he was found by fellow climbers. His incredible story of survival made headlines worldwide. Number 9. Suomo Yamaguchi. On August 6, 1945, Suomo Yamaguchi, a Japanese industrial worker, was in Hiroshima on a business trip when the first atomic bomb was dropped. Miraculously, he survived the blast, suffering severe burns and injuries, but managed to find shelter and eventually make his way back to his hometown, Nagasaki. Just 3 days later, on August 9th, while Yamaguchi was back in Nagasaki recovering from his injuries, the second atomic bomb was dropped on the city. Despite the overwhelming devastation and chaos, Yamaguchi survived this second bomb as well, experiencing yet another catastrophic explosion from a close range. The double survivor of these two catastrophic events became a living symbol of the sheer improbability of surviving such bombings. Yamaguchi's survival was nothing short of extraordinary. His experiences in both cities gave him a unique perspective on the horror and destruction wrought by atomic warfare. After the bombings, he faced a grueling recovery process, dealing with the physical and emotional scars of his ordeal. Yamaguchi's story highlights the immense human cost of nuclear war and his resilience in the face of such overwhelming adversity. His account contributed significantly to the historical and scientific understanding of the effects of atomic bombs, and he lived to share his experiences until his passing in 2010. All right, guys, it's time for our subscribers pick. The image you're looking at was captured in a small-town hospital. The man woke up from a 19-year coma, and what he told disturbed everyone. Describing a dark, twisted world, he spoke of being trapped in a nightmarish realm filled with restless souls who could not find peace. The man, named Thomas, gave an unsettling account of this eerie afterlife that left the medical staff and his family deeply shaken. Thomas's revelations raised disturbing questions about what really happens to people in comas. What do you think? Is Thomas's experience a glimpse into the unknown, or is there another explanation? Share your thoughts on life, death, and the mysteries of consciousness in the comments below. Number 8. Beatriz Flamini. On November 21, 2021, Spanish climber and cave explorer Beatriz Flamini embarked on an extraordinary psychological experiment by entering the Cave of Malaga in southern Spain, where she would spend 500 days in complete isolation, 230 feet underground. This ambitious venture aimed to study the effects of prolonged isolation on mental health. Flamini's adventure was meticulously planned, with her staying in a small, self-sufficient chamber, outfitted with essential supplies, food, and water. She was completely cut off from the outside world, with no contact with family, friends, or even a means of tracking time. The only sounds she heard were the natural ones echoing through the cave, adding to the surreal atmosphere of her subterranean environment. During her extended stay, Flamini conducted personal research, keeping detailed journals and documenting her experiences. The isolation allowed her to observe and analyze the psychological effects of extreme seclusion, including changes in perception, time distortion, and emotional responses. Flamini also used the time to reflect on her own thoughts and maintain physical fitness through exercises adapted to the confined space. After 500 days, Flamini emerged from the cave, greeted by a world that had changed significantly. Her experience provided valuable insights into human endurance and the mental challenges of isolation. Number 7. Tim Lancaster. On June 10, 1990, British Airways Flight 5390 was en route from Birmingham to Malaga when an extraordinary incident occurred. Captain Tim Lancaster, a seasoned pilot, was flying the Boeing 737 when a critical malfunction led to the explosive decompression of the aircraft at 23,000 feet. The decompression resulted in the cockpit window being blown out, partially ejecting Lancaster from the cockpit. Miraculously, Lancaster was caught outside the aircraft by his safety harness and seatbelt, with his upper body exposed to the frigid, high-altitude conditions. The situation was dire. With Lancaster partially outside the plane, the crew faced the daunting challenge of regaining control and ensuring the safety of all 81 passengers on board. The co-pilot, Alistair Acheson, and the cabin crew displayed extraordinary composure under extreme pressure. Acheson quickly took over the flight controls, while the flight attendants, led by Sarah Ritchie, secured Lancaster to prevent him from being fully ejected. Despite the chaos, Ritchie managed to maintain a calm demeanor, helping to keep Lancaster's body stabilized. The crew's quick actions and professional handling of the emergency enabled the aircraft to land safely at Southampton Airport. Lancaster survived the incident, though he sustained severe frostbite and was later treated for his injuries. Number 6. Anatoly Bugorsky. In 1978, Anatoly Bugorsky, a Soviet scientist working at the Institute for High-Energy Physics in Protvino, Russia, experienced an accident that defied belief and transformed our understanding of radiation injuries. Bugorsky, a physicist specializing in particle acceleration, was conducting routine maintenance on the U-70 synchrotron, a particle accelerator. During his work, he accidentally exposed his head to a proton beam, a high-energy stream of particles designed to reach nearly the speed of light. The incident occurred when Bugorsky's face was directly in the path of the proton beam. The beam, which was approximately 1.5 centimeters in diameter and carried an energy of 76 giga-electron volts, struck the left side of his face. The result was a dramatic and immediate effect, a flash of light, followed by an intense burning sensation. The proton beam penetrated Bugorsky's skull, passing through his brain and leaving a visible, albeit non-lethal, burn mark. Miraculously, Bugorsky survived the accident. However, the effects on his body were severe and complex. He suffered from significant neurological damage, including partial paralysis on the left side of his face and problems with speech and hearing. Despite these challenges, Bugorsky's cognitive functions remained largely intact. His case provided invaluable data for understanding the effects of proton radiation on human tissue, influencing safety protocols for handling high-energy particle beams. Number 5. Mario Prosperi. In 1994, Mario Prosperi, an Italian ultramarathon runner, faced one of the most harrowing survival challenges imaginable when he became lost in the Sahara Desert during the 1994 Marathon des Sables, a grueling 150-mile race through one of the world's harshest environments. Prosperi's ordeal began when a violent sandstorm struck, causing chaos and disorientation among the race participants. Separated from his team and unable to find his way back, Prosperi was left alone in the vast, unforgiving desert. The storm, with its fierce winds and blinding sand, obliterated landmarks and made navigation nearly impossible. As days passed, Prosperi's situation grew increasingly dire. Without adequate food or water, he faced extreme dehydration and exhaustion. Desperate to survive, he rationed his meager supplies and used his limited resources to build makeshift shelters. He drank rainwater collected in his running gear and found minimal sustenance by eating desert plants and, ultimately, even resorting to drinking his own urine. Prosperi's plight lasted for 9 days, during which he wandered over 180 miles, far beyond the race's intended route. Remarkably, he survived his ordeal and was eventually found by a nomadic tribe. His rescue marked the end of a grueling and dangerous adventure that tested his physical and mental endurance to the limits. Number 4. Bahia Bakari. On June 1st, 2009, Bahia Bakari, a 12-year-old girl from France, faced an extraordinary test of survival when she became the sole survivor of a tragic plane crash. Bahia was traveling with her mother on Yemenia Airways Flight 626, a flight from Paris to Moroni, Comoros, which crashed into the Indian Ocean during its approach to the Comoros Islands. The flight encountered severe turbulence and adverse weather conditions, ultimately leading to its catastrophic failure. The plane plunged into the ocean, breaking apart upon impact. Bahia's mother and the other passengers perished in the disaster, leaving Bahia alone and struggling for survival amidst the wreckage. Against overwhelming odds, Bahia clung to debris and managed to stay afloat in the open sea. Remarkably, she survived for 9 hours in the water, enduring the chilling temperatures and the vast, dark expanse of the ocean. Her bravery was crucial as she used floating wreckage to stay above water and fend off exhaustion. Bahia was eventually rescued by a passing fishing boat. Number 3. Masabumi Hosono. On April 15, 1912, when the RMS Titanic struck an iceberg and sank, Masabumi Hosono was one of the few survivors from the Japanese community. As the only Japanese passenger to survive the catastrophe, his story is often overshadowed by accusations of cowardice and scandal. Hosono was a 35-year-old Japanese railway official who had boarded the Titanic for a business trip to America. When the ship hit the iceberg, he initially followed the general evacuation orders, but later found himself in a lifeboat. As the disaster unfolded, Hosono's decision to board a lifeboat was seen by some as an act of cowardice, particularly since he was accused of not adhering to the principles of bravery and chivalry associated with the disaster. The public's reaction to Hosono was harsh. Many criticized him for allegedly pushing women and children aside to secure his place in a lifeboat, although the specifics of these accusations remain murky. The scrutiny intensified when he returned to Japan, where he faced widespread condemnation and social ostracism. He was portrayed as a cowardly figure who had survived the disaster by questionable means, in contrast to the heroic narratives surrounding many other survivors. Number 2. Joe Simpson. In 1985, British mountaineer Joe Simpson faced one of the most incredible survival stories in the annals of climbing. While tackling the perilous Ciula Grande in the Peruvian Andes, Simpson and his climbing partner, Simon Yates, encountered a catastrophic turn of events that would test their endurance and resolve in ways few can imagine. During their ascent, Simpson fell into a hidden crevasse, suffering a severe compound fracture in his leg. Despite his dire condition, he managed to climb out of the crevasse and signal for help. The team faced deteriorating weather conditions and treacherous terrain. As they descended, Simpson's injury worsened, and their situation became increasingly desperate. In a remarkable act of courage and determination, Simpson began a harrowing solo journey to base camp. Over the course of 3 grueling days, he crawled and dragged himself across the unforgiving terrain, navigating with his broken leg and severe frostbite. Simpson's resilience was nothing short of extraordinary as he endured excruciating pain and near starvation, all while battling the freezing temperatures and high altitudes. His relentless struggle was finally rewarded when he reached base camp, where he was rescued by Yates and the rest of the team. Simpson's incredible ordeal, later recounted in his book, remains an inspiring example of the human spirit's capacity to overcome the most insurmountable obstacles, solidifying his place as a legend in the world of mountaineering. Number 1. Roy Sullivan. Roy Sullivan, a park ranger from Virginia, holds an astonishing record as the lightning rod of the world, having been struck by lightning a staggering 7 times between 1942 and 1977. Sullivan's remarkable encounters with lightning make him one of the most extraordinary figures in meteorological history. His first lightning strike occurred in 1942, while Sullivan was working in the Shenandoah National Park. At the time, he was a young ranger battling a wildfire. The lightning struck him, but miraculously, he survived with minor injuries. This initial encounter was just the beginning of an incredible series of events. Over the next 35 years, Sullivan faced 6 more lightning strikes, each with increasingly severe consequences. Remarkably, he survived every strike, His experiences included being struck while in his truck, at his home, and while working outdoors. The repeated strikes resulted in various injuries, including burns, temporary blindness, and hearing loss. Sullivan's fortunate survival of lightning earned him a place in the Guinness World Records. Despite his remarkable survival, each lightning strike took a toll on his health and well-being. And that's all for today. Thanks for watching.